All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And welcome to the Adam Messer Show. My name is Adam Messer, and I'm your host today. And my special guest today is an author and an editor. She has a new anthology coming out, and her name is Lenore Hart. So welcome, Lenore. Thank you so much for being here with us today. How are you?
Great, Adam. Thanks for having us on. We're very happy to be here.
And Lenore, you also have a couple of folks with you in the room, right?
Right. I actually invited a couple of the story authors from the Night Bazaar to be here as well, and maybe later we'll do some really brief readings. So with me also is David Poyer, who has a story in there, and also Aphrodite Anagnost, whose story is actually appears first in the anthology.
Oh, great. Well, welcome everybody. How are y'all doing?
Great. How are you today?
Pretty good. So,
they're all eager to go, as you can hear.
yeah. So everybody tuning in at home, I met Lenore online. I don't know. We're in the Horror Writers Association group together, and I met her online. If you remember, we had Toni Morris on the show, and Lenore was actually the one who had suggested to Toni to contact me about doing the show. And so pretty excited about that. So we're going to be talking about the new anthology this hour, and we've got them for both hours. So Bass, do you mind playing a little bit for us? All right, so this is Sebastian Messer. He's going to be playing some live music. Thank you, Sebastian. Okay, so Lenore, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the new anthology that's coming out?
Gosh, where to start, Adam? Probably not at birth, right? You're just.
I was born. I grew up. Now I'm here.
A poor child in Florida. No, that's actually not entirely true. Well, I'll start after that because that would be a long story. Actually, I'm a writer, a fiction writer, who also teaches fiction writing at Wilkes University in the MFA program. I'm also an editor, and I also teach. My connection with, you're down in Savannah, and my connection there is that I'm one of the fiction faculty at the Ossabaw Island Writers Retreat, which is on that barrier island, which is right. Some viewers may be familiar with. And I started out actually as a poet, but I also have always had a long time love of fairy tales, fantasy, horror stories, especially the eerie, ghostly, eerie kind, not so much the head-exploding kind. And that's how I started out writing fiction. I wrote a few horror novels under a pen name, Elisabeth Graves. And then after an MFA program, I was kind of diverted briefly into historical fiction, contemporary fiction, and I've lately, because I noticed some elements of that popping up in my later novels, I've kind of come back around full circle to writing fantasy and horror and just fantastic fiction in general. So that's kind of what evoked the creation of the anthology, The Night Bazaar. That and the fact that there was my daughter who lived in New York City at the time had told me about a midnight market that was in Brooklyn where they lived, and it was called the Night Bazaar. It no longer exists. I think it was around for a few years and then kind of faded away because maybe they lost their warehouse space or something. But I thought it was a great title, and I assumed somebody probably already used it, but as it turned out, they had not. So I quickly trademarked it and then thought, what am I going to do with this? And I finally decided that what it would be a great title to encompass a theme for an anthology that had lots of different short stories in every speculative fiction genre. I didn't want to exclude anything, so basically it's fantasy, it's science fiction yet, but that would certainly be welcome. So the first two volumes, the Night Bazaar, which was set in present-day New York City, and this current one, the Night Bazaar Venice, which is where the bazaar is located in its origin, which is 14th century Venice. They both have stories in a variety of genres, ghost stories, fantasy, dark fantasy, magical realism, and eerie historical fiction. So it's kind of a mixture, and I think they all go together well, though. So that was my indication that I thought it was going to be kind of open to almost anything, I guess is what I'm saying. I didn't want to exclude people, and I wanted to create something that would possibly even appeal to people who don't normally read in those genres.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you said that you'd have them do a reading. Could you give the reader or the audience a taste of that now?
Sure, they are. I thought maybe first I would read briefly from the introduction, because as the editor, I do have one story in the current one, but as the editor, I'm the person who writes the introduction and the closing, and also the brief intros to the stories. So maybe it would set it up best for the listeners if I read the opening to the whole anthology.
Sure, yeah, that sounds good.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So I'm going to be reading in the voice of my character, who is the person who actually created and runs the bazaar. Her name is Madame Vera, and she's been around a long time, much longer than the bazaar itself. Welcome to a most peculiar and unusual bazaar, which appeared at first that fateful season nearly 700 years ago in St. Mark's Square. Greetings, gentle guest. Come and mingle among us, the revelers of the first night bazaar in history. Our marketplace may already be known to you from visits to other cities, possibly in other times, but it first appeared in St. Mark's Square at midnight during the week preceding Christmas in 1348, a festival that embraced the strange, the secretive, and the cunning, conceived as an entertainment by the noble wife of a wealthy Venetian merchant, one Signora Vera Fortunato, intended, it was said, to raise alms for poor unfortunates. Its wonders briefly graced the famous square, enticing masked revelers and confounding envious passers-by, and inexorably and condemned. After a mere 7 days, it closed, but by then the citizens of La Serenissima had more dire concerns, for the bazaar's appearance, oddly enough, coincided with the arrival of Yersinia pestis. The Black Death arrived with such violence that for decades afterward, scribes from around the world wrote of its depredations. But some works, more obscure and controversial, also describe the continuation of a supernatural night marketplace, which set up shop for 1 week only in various places around the world and then moved on, as happened when the Night Bazaar came to Paris in 1796, to London in the 1880s, Berlin in the 1930s, San Francisco in 1906, Manhattan in 2017, among other venues, never appearing for more than 7 consecutive nights and never to be seen again in the same city. Tickets to this mysterious event may not be had for love, political influence, or any amount of money, or indeed any other means, no matter how underhanded, persistent, lucrative, violent, or fatal the attempt to procure them. Only the invited, those personally summoned in some way, often by the bazaar's own mistress of ceremonies, can gain admittance, and then for 1 night only. But how invited, you ask? Why, in various ways. An elegant invitation, a brief text from a stranger, which quickly vanishes from the screen, or perhaps some cryptic calligraphy on parchment, or a too pale, slender hand beckoning from an alleyway. We either choose you, or we don't. The bazaar opens at midnight and closes just before dawn. So step inside into an assemblage so large it could not possibly be contained in the modest structure you saw from the outside. Take a deep breath, stroll around, take it all in. The stalls, tents, carts, and booths are filled with an amazing variety of goods, new and ancient, all of impeccable quality. Antique oddities of interesting origin, some of great beauty, others of soul-shriveling ugliness. Potions and playthings, poisons and props, grimoires and paintings, cast-off white elephants, some as large as their namesake, displayed next to curious objects and devices crafted of ancient rusted steel, the identifiable beasts, or casts of finely engraved silver, all meant to perform, well, who knows what arcane functions. But this is not all that's on offer in these strong dials. In curtained alcoves, you'll note various forms of tattooing, piercing, exotic costuming in vintage cloths and fine leathers, certain unusual elective surgeries, pottery vessels, papier-mâché masks, herbal and alchemical treatments, as well as every sort of body art and alteration, imaginable or not. And, of course, the expected palm reading, tarot spreads, tea leaf scrying, and water, glass, and crystal gazing one might see at any Italian street fair. The difference being that our purveyors of hidden truths are never mistaken in prognostications. So I'll stop there. That's from the opening.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. So, with that, with the introduction and all, you have 13 stories in this anthology, right?
Yes, the entire anthology is composed of the opening that I just read from, which goes on for a couple more pages, and then of 13 stories all by different authors. One is mine, and then we have 12 other people who've contributed stories. And I write a short introduction, about a paragraph for each story, and those, as the reader goes through, serve as an introduction, almost like the narrator is leading them through, actually leading them through the aisles of the Night Bazaar from booth.
Okay.
And so that gives it kind of an intimate feel, and also, I think, kind of helps the reader feel like they're actually there. And then at the end, I write a closing, as the bazaar packs up its tents and moves on to the next city. So, but each story, the authors all had pretty much free reign with the stories they wrote, as long as it, was conformed to, certain aspects of the bazaar, and, so that, and also that it also, each one is connected to the bazaar. They're not just random stories. It's not like an anthology where, you might see year's best fantasy and science fiction, which is a great anthology, but the stories in there are all, they're all random, really. They're not connected in any way. They're just best stories they found that year that they wanted to put in. But all of these stories are connected by the theme and by the setting, and sometimes by characters that reappear. So there is that. But each author, aside from that, had free reign. And so all the stories have some repeating themes, but they're also quite different and have different styles, too.
Okay. Hey, everybody, you're listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So, could you have David or Aphrodite do a reading now?
Sure, will. Hang on one second.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, in the meantime, everybody, the Night Bazaar, Venice, just came out. It's a new release, and I was really taken aback. I love the cover art of it, and Lenore and I, it's a funny backstory here, but she had sent me a message and talking about maybe doing the show, but I was booked up through December, so I was like, well, hey, let's try to do like a podcast or whatever, and I could just throw it up. So we talked Friday, and then we actually recorded the podcast yesterday, and then I was going to be posting the podcast yesterday, and unfortunately my guest today canceled. So it just turned out to be like, just fate or whatever, or maybe Madame Vera set it up for us all there for you to be on the show today. But I thought it was a great opportunity to be able to talk with you about your new anthology. So a little bit of backstory there for everybody listening in. If something else I like to do too. We'll have an opportunity to do this, but I just want to, just give a shout out to all the listeners, and thank you everybody tuning in today. And all right. So do we have Aphrodite or David on the line?
We're going to have, first we're going to have Aphrodite reading from her short story, The Cure, which is one of the stories that's set at the time of the bazaar in 1348 in Venice. And Aphrodite, in her other life, doctor and an equestrian, and also works at or owns, I guess I should say, an equestrian publishing company with her husband, Richard Williams. So she's going to read from that now. The Cure. Oh, right. And I'm back first. Oh, silly, silly Madame Vera. Forgot that first, as Madame Vera, in my role as Madame Vera, I'm going to read the brief introduction to Aphrodite's story, so they'll get this is an example of how I, tie the stories together. So here's the introduction, ostensibly given by Madame Vera to Aphrodite's story, The Cure. This striped silk tent houses one of the Night Bazaar's most sought-after cosmetic vendors. Inside, protected by a leaded glass display box, 3 items are arranged: a clay pot of rouge for the lips, a cake of black coal with its own tiny brush to outline the eyes, and a wooden box of the finest white face powder, complete with a lamb's wool puff. The vendor supplies these tools of artifice to the fine ladies of the Doge's court, as well as to famous courtesans, and also to more ordinary women of the evening who must also make their way in a world controlled by powerful men of often corrupt and violent disposition. This purveyor of feminine beauty is known throughout Venice as the most skilled at her trade. The women of the city flock to her stall. So it will be no surprise that the 3 items in the glass box also will play a part in the story to come: a tale of religion gone wrong, of the sisterhood of the craft, and of hard bargains, secret plots, and cold revenge. And also, for some of the more fortunate players, a chance at redemption and escape to a safer and gentler world than this city's narrow and sometimes cruel streets. The Cure by Aphrodite Anagnost.
Miriam held the sweaty boy in her lap, rocking him as his breaths became less frequently and turned even more rasping. The salt and yeast scents of roasting fish and baked bread rose from the busy street below, drifting through the open window, carried on a chill breeze. A holiday festival was riotly in progress over in St. Mark's Square. Turning carefully on the straw-stuffed mattress, trying not to wake the ailing child, she leaned on the windowsill and stared down. From her tiny attic eyrie, though a blurred veil of tears, she could trace the sluggish meander of Rio Eliseca. The torn lace curtain fluttered about her face like tattered wings. It appeared all of Venice had fled to the square to celebrate the strangest Christmas Eve Mass in the history of St. Mark's Basilica. Miriam wondered why this Night Bazaar had been allowed, as the Doge had canceled the usual seasonal celebration on quarantine orders. At least 300 had died in the city since the last full moon. People always look to blame someone or something for such misfortunes: miasmas, foreigners, heretics, witches. This time was no different. She had heard the gossip and muttering in her own name about the rare objects, alchemy, strange and worldly services, the ancient artifacts this bazaar was rumored to offer, things most would ordinarily condemn as blasphemy or the tools of witches. Yet even the priests huddled in the cathedral had allowed the celebration, perhaps hoping someone connected with it would miraculously discover an elixir to cure the plague. Those same priests had more than once declared Miriam herself indecent. A woman alone, with no man to support her, to protect from the travails of daily life. She had a small business of her own, making and selling perfumes to the ladies of the Doge's palace. Oils distilled by her own hands from the herbs and flowers of her birthplace, Verona. But women were not supposed to work, save to make lace or sell a few vegetables in the marketplace. Worse yet, her only child had known no father, or at least none whose name she would reveal. Yet, she was not a mother as loving as any other. She lay down again beside poor Amadeo, peeling the damp sheets away from his hot, sticky body. The cloth still smelled of goat urine from the physician's useless poultice. She ducked her head to kiss the little boy's smooth, childish belly. His sweat tasted like her. What if he died now in her arms? In terror, her hands gently pressing his shivering shoulders, as if she could hold his soul in place, she slid them down to his chest, counting the breaths, which came too slow, too fast sometimes. His lips opening now, and then to cry out at the shadows painting the moist plaster walls were rosy petals. He was perfect, innocent. She had vowed at his birth to let nothing harm him, ever. The boy coughed. A thin trickle of blood at one corner of his mouth made his skin appear even whiter. Frantically, she held him close again, breathing in his scent, still clean and fruity, beneath the faint metallic tang of the sickness, She pressed an ear to his chest. His heart drummed there, faint and rapid, as a hummingbird's wings. Amadeo was so frail, his soul all but fled. His ailment would surely be fatal. She pressed a gentle kiss against his mouth, and her tears spilled over, abandoning her cheeks, dropping onto his chin. His chest heaved. The next exhalation had pronounced heaviness, and for a moment she feared the worst. That was when God spoke in Miriam's ear, whispering what she must do. Pay attention to each breath. As the exhalation leaves his mouth, look for the sickness, and then take it from him. She would do anything, risk anything to save her own son, and this advice sounded at least as sensible as the foolish nostrums the quack doctors prescribed, far better than a goat-piss poultice. She sat very still, holding him, silently waiting for Amadeo's next breath. When it did not come, she whispered, "Inhale, my love." At last, he gave a faint sigh. The narrow, hollow chest rose a little. She wept in relief. Again, let it out now, once more, for Mama. When his chest moved again, he exhaled a tiny puff of air, and Miriam, watching intently, eyes narrowed in concentration, finally saw it, the pestilence, a faint curl of gray smoke escaping his lips along with the breath. So, as God had instructed, she unhesitatingly inhaled that pale miasma, sucking its poison into her lungs with such force she could feel the plague smoke withdrawing from Amadeo's body and coming into her own, as if the disease itself not only understood her plan, but approved. First, it entered her mouth and settled on her tongue, a bitter taste coating her teeth with an oily film. Next, smoke trickled down her throat, which opened and permitted it to pass, as a shuddering guard allows the enemy to step inside castle gates. All the while, she fought back an urge to cough, to choke, to expel the intruder. It passed on into her lungs and instantly descended, as if by many roads, down into her belly, which immediately cramped, offering to vomit it out. She silently and stoically commanded the protesting organ to yield, to allow the murderous intruder to land and dwell even more deeply inside her. So the pestilence settled, as bleed might, even lower, down into the amphora of her uterus. By then, she didn't even need to exhale. It was as if her lungs had become capacious caverns. When she sucked down another breath, her toes and fingers stiffened like rods of iron. Her fingernails tingled. Her chest was an iron vault.
All right, that was pretty interesting. So, Aphrodite, can you tell us a little bit more about the story as you were writing it, and was going through your head as this kind of unfurled for you?
Well, I mean, this was completely a pre-pandemic kind of automatic writing thing that I did. After I had made several stabs at a different sort of story, I have a job as a addiction specialist, and I treat a lot of opium addicts. And so I had started to write the story in an opium den. And I just one day, just feeling what it might be like to have a child dying in your arms from actually heroin, I wrote this freelance poem, and it was really like a metaphor for all plagues. And so it just drew on my medical experience of when people do not understand how something, I mean, it really comes from actually heroin addiction. When people do not understand what is this process, what is the process of how it's like smoke. I mean, before it hijacks the brain, I mean, it really came from that and watching a mom in my office with her son, and she was just terrified that he would die. And that's how that story came to me.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I think if you were write the nonfiction side of it, it'd be just as interesting. So.
Yeah, really, it would. I mean, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's pretty fascinating. Also, I had a grandma that was really quite witchy, and didn't do. She was from Greece and didn't really respect Western medicine at all, and had a child die in her arms that way
Mm.
of rheumatic fever, actually. So it was kind of I think epigenetic phenomenon,
Mm.
partly also.
We have rolling thunderstorms going through right now, so if y'all are hearing a little bit of static, it's probably the line. So I apologize. So
Okay.
yeah, that's a really interesting story there. When you first read the story, Lenore, what did you think?
Well, I was really taken by it. I for some reason, I guess I had been expecting that Frances was going to write a contemporary story, something to do with medicine or the cure for something. I think we're talking about a cure for the plague story type view. So when I got this, I was really, really pleased because, I mean, obviously, I decided it was, that it opened the anthology because in many ways, it isn't just a great story. It also kind of within it encapsulates all the things that are in the anthology. Venice, the setting, the darkness of what's going on, the plague, and how it affects the population. Plus, the Night Bazaar you'll see it later in the story. She actually runs through the Night Bazaar, so that's in there too. All the stories are quite good, but this one I think I chose for the opening, not just because it was an excellent story, but because it had all the elements that I think will introduce a reader very quickly and very vividly to what the bazaar is about and what the place is like. So that's why I was really excited to get this one.
That's great. Well, we've got a few minutes before the station break. How long have you been writing, Aphrodite?
Well, I wrote a soap opera with my friend in middle school,
Mm.
and she turned that into a sort of this kind of homoerotic novel series. And then I write chart notes. And so when I was in medical school, I was writing these chart notes, and I realized that the story of these medical problems that people had were really the stories of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of got interested in the detailed piece, not so much the medical, what is like the left brain science piece. I got more interested in kind of what is the backdrop of this, and so I started to. I wrote a memoir. Well, it's not a memoir, it's a novel, and it's called Memoir of a Death Angel, and I wrote that after I had worked in hospice doing, just helping people die, being like a doula, for about 6 or 7 years. That brought in, kind of my ancestors, the thing with my grandma and, the witchiness and, science versus the supernatural, and it just felt like I needed to express myself in this way.
That's interesting. I'm glad you shared that with us. Yeah, we're really getting these thunderstorms, like lightning and thunder and all that.
I took this writing class, so I had this idea for this novel, and then I started to write something about being a medical examiner, because I was also a medical examiner at the time, and I was friends with Lenore, but didn't really intersect with her on the writing piece. And then I took that first chapter to the workshop with Lenore and Dave, and then I always had something that I was writing ever since.
Oh, that's great. That's great. What we're going to do is right now, everybody, we're going to do our little station break. So we'll be back in about 2 minutes or so. And thanks a lot for tuning in. You're listening to WRUU, LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul.
This is a message from the Georgia State Department of Public Health. Right now, federal and state guidelines recommend staying home if possible and limiting time in public places as precautions associated with social distancing. The more we use social distancing techniques, the more we reduce the risk of the virus spreading. This is especially important for older people and those with underlying health conditions who are most vulnerable to the virus. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov.
You are attuned to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
This portion of WRUU Savannah Soundings programming is brought to you by listeners and the Ships of the Sea Museum. The wait is over. The Ships of the Sea Museum has reopened. Learn about the West Broad Street School, the first publicly funded school for black children in Savannah. See one of 2 surviving weather kiosks in the country. And Ships of the Sea new Tour Buddy app allows everyone to discover what makes Savannah, Savannah. More information can be found at shipsofthesea.org.
WRUU 107.5 FM is a new and different listener-supported and all-volunteer community radio station for Savannah. Our diverse broadcast and web programming is supported by generous listeners who value our passion and spunk. We are independent of other media and receive no government or large corporate support. People like you are our largest and most important source of our funding. Go to WRUU.org to find out how you can make a one-time or a monthly contribution. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we are back, and as you can hear, maybe, I don't know, but there's a lot of thunder, and we've got storms coming through, so, yeah, it's dark and scary. This is a perfect time to have some horror stories on the air. So, Lenore, we're back, and we just had the reading from Aphrodite. How about let's set David up, and let's hear his reading, and that'll be good for, like, this second half of the first hour.
Absolutely. I think he's probably pretty eager to read. He looks kind of eager to read.
Ahoy.
So, yeah, ahoy, Mr. Ahoy. So Captain Ahoy, I should say. So I'll give a little background on the next reader, who is David Poyer. This particular genre is not one that David normally writes in, although he's quite familiar with it, and the small publishing house we have, Northampton House Press, we publish in this genre, but David has published himself, mostly with St. Martin Press, almost 50 books. Is that right, David? About 50 books. And they're in various genres, but his mostly, I guess, best known for his Navy series, which has been ongoing for 30 years at least. And his main character, Dan Lenson, is well known and very popular with military readers and readers who are interested in warfare and the military. It's also taught, this is unusual for this type of book, it's not really just a thriller, it's very character-driven stories. So his novels are also taught at the Naval Academy at Annapolis in various classes.
Oh, cool.
But that's his main thing that he does. He also writes a series of, I think, what he calls ecological novels. They're contemporary. They're based in his hometown or his home county in northwestern Pennsylvania, although he made up a fictional name for it. It's a fictional county called Hemlock County, kind of like Faulkner's fictional county, which I don't think I can pronounce on the radio, but something like Yoknatahapa or whatever. I just mangled it, I know. But it's kind of like that concept, but it's a fictional county in northwest Pennsylvania, and so his stories are based in small towns there, and there's all sorts of issues going on, the economics, the oil fields, and things that happen to people there when they're victimized by corporations, like when they dump chemicals and things there. So there's that series, the Hemlock County series that he writes, and then some one-offs like The Whiteness of the Whale, which was another take on, a rather contemporary take on Melville's Moby Dick. So that's a very interesting one, but it's set in the present day. So anyway, that's primarily what David does. He's also the founder of Northampton House Press, and Northampton House is, of course, the press that puts out the Night Bazaar, the one that I refer as the editor of that. So I guess without further ado,
are you going to read the intro for the story like you did, Madame Vera?
Oh, yes, I am. Thank you. Everybody's reminding me. Yes, I keep wanting to launch into that. But I am going to read, as Madame Vera, I am going to read the introduction to David's story. David's story is Interesting, too, because it is a take, well, this will explain that. It's kind of a take on a Poe story, which is well known. The title is The Thousand Injuries of Fortunato. One famous story by a certain Mr. Edgar A. Poe, 19th century master of the macabre, is unique in literature. For the cask of Amontillado consists not of the usual beginning, middle, and ending, but only the story's final events. The last act of a tale of long-suffered outrages for which the injured, grudge-holding party finally takes revenge in a very concrete manner. In a quieter, less accessible aisle of the bazaar stands a deserted stall littered with faded signs. Its goods seem little more than jumbled bits of iron, broken fittings, or discarded hand tools, a hodgepodge scattered across plank trestle tables, bent drill bits, rusty files, peculiarly curved wrenches, an ancient hammer, assemblages of screws and pinchers, rulers marked in L's and lines, dull saws, axes with loose heads. But amid the junk gleams an ancient-looking trowel that nonetheless appears new, for its fine steel blade shines. The handle, crafted from a dense, expensive wood, is intricately carved. Perhaps it was made more for ceremony than for actual use. Yet along those still sharp edges cling hoary grains of crusted mortar. The Thousand Injuries of Fortunato by David Poyer.
I suppose this will sound strange, but Fortunato and I were friends in our youth. As boys, we both attended the Academy of old Dr. Guarino in an obscure quarter of Venezia. La Serenissima, ruler of the waves, bastion of liberty, mistress of empire, and the greatest, most beautiful city below heaven. He and I were classmates, yet not of the same social class. Ognabene's family had been prominent ever since the ancient Romans, fleeing invading barbarians, refounded their republic at these swampy islets. The Fortunatos were members of the Signoria. Our great-grandfather had governed as Doge. My family, the Montresors, were patricians once as well, but during the Crusades, paying ransoms had destroyed our fortunes. We retained only our pride, our coat of arms, and an antique palazzo in the Rialto, the oldest quarter of the city. A stonemason, my maternal grandfather had arrived from the Terra Firma 40 years before. The towering splendor of St. Mark's, the skyward yearning of the Campanile. My father, my grandfather, barged that sugar-white stone of which our city's glory is wrought from our quarry at Rovigno on the Istrian coast. We owe the towers, basilicas, sumptuous palaces which line our serpentine canals to artisans like him, not to those whose names adorn books of history. When I inherited the family business, I devoted myself to expanding our holdings and, above all, to executing work of the highest quality. This duty he had impressed upon me again and again as the creed against which craftsmen should measure ourselves. Thus, as we grew, young Fortunato's path and mine diverged. His destino led to important posts in diplomacy, the archives, and the administration of our overseas territories. Mine to the teeming wharves, quarries, and our family's noisy, hustling construction sites. The bulwark of our eternal republic is that all men are free to work and build, each for his own profit, yet uniting in defense of the common good. Still, in the narrow alleys of our great town, Fortunato and I would sometimes come face to face, and seldom did our meetings end without adjourning to a wine shop. A connoisseur, he favored that nutty aromatic sherry called Amontillado. Imported from Spain, it was rare even when the riches of the Mediterranean flowed through our hands. Our first disagreement began at a time when all seemed otherwise well. War with Genoa had been averted. Each day, our galleys moored at the mole, disgorging silk from China, pepper, cloves, dye stuffs from the Indies, wool from England, intricately woven carpets from the deserts of Araby, and as merchants prosper, they send for builders. The chest in the catacomb beneath my palazzo grew heavy with gold. I purchased a brickyard and clay pitch on the mainland, rebuilt the kilns, and sold fine red and a terracotta roofing tile stamped with our family crest. A man killing a serpent whose fangs are embedded in his heel. I began to lend money, too. I suspect old Heshemet abstracted more than the 1 part in 20 that was his due. Yet I made no complaint, for so skillful were his manipulations that my capital multiplied like the rats that scour the wharves by night. But with wealth also came the sin of pride. I began to look above my station, yearning to reclaim the honors that had once made our name respected. Encountering my old friend in St. Mark's Square one day as I returned from crossbow practice with the city militia, I took him to a taberna overlooking the Bacino. The black gondolas bobbed at their moorings. The island of Giudecca and the spires of San Giorgio wavered across the water. I revealed my hopes over cups of a Greek pressing. The passing of old Censendolo has left a vacancy on the Maggior Consiglio. Is it possible I might secure his seat? Stroking his chestnut beard, my former schoolmate gazed out upon the glittering sea. At last he murmured, "The great council, it would cost many of those golden ducati you love so well, dear Nicoletto, friend of my youth." I spread my hands. It is true I love gold, but to forward the interests of our city is my dearest wish. I believe God has given me good fortune for a reason. Fortunato cocked his head, as if harking to the song of a distant sirena. "You were to commit your private funds to La Serenissima." I nodded. When yet a boy, I wished to become a captain general. My grandfather insisted business came first. Or perhaps I can add to the glory of the most serene republic in some other way. When Fortunato smiled, his sharp-nosed features resembled a rat's. Gesturing to the attendant for more wine, he leaned in. To qualify, one must be patrilineally descended from a former consular. Yours is an old bloodline, though now sadly obscured. No doubt the archives could find one among your ancestors. But do you truly wish for such responsibility? You were never the most brilliant ornament of old Guarino's academy. His lecture bored me. I shrugged. I hated Greek. Truly, I found it fascinating. Did you know he is dead? I shook my head. I purchased his entire library from the widow. Fortunato smiled. In any case, you are a respected businessman. Trade has not the stigma here that it carries in Florence or Milan. And you are young, but some complain our signoria has grown too gray. He let that hang in the air, then murmured, "How much are you willing to commit to a campaign?" I hadn't actually thought my offer to be for a campaign, but rather a donation to be applied for the good of the city. The dredging of a pesky shoal or another bridge across the Canal Grande. What would you suggest? He proposed a sum that rocked me back in my seat. By Christ's body, such a commitment would absorb my entire profit for this year. Fortunato flicked his fingers as if they were wet. For what one truly desires, why count the price? And remember, once you don the golden chain of nobility, your heirs too will jump the hominy. It is not an expense, but an investment. We met again 2 days later in old Heshemet's counting house. Fortunato refused a bill of exchange. Gold would speak more ardently, he said. I handed over minted coin in hempen bags, weighty enough that he whistled his gondolierian to carry them to the boat. Yes, I felt a pang as the fruit of my toil vanished, that when someday I married, my children would sit among the mighty at the feast of the sea, as the city pledged its troth anew to Oceanus with a golden ring. So I eagerly awaited the next session of the Council of 40. As everyone knows, after names are placed in nomination, the balloting is secret. Still, everyone had a rumor to pass on, and the chatter along the waterfront was this. Of all the candidates put forward, none had yet achieved the 20 votes necessary for election. The next morning, a crier below my palazzo announced, Salvatore Pisani has been elected. I dashed my wine cup to the floor. It shattered, sending my orange hat clawing frantically up the window hangings. I called for my boat and set out to confront my friend. He was just leaving a small apartment near the archives, where one of his servants had informed me he spent hours each day with his collection of rare manuscripts. I drew him into a doorway, glancing up to make sure no chamber pots were being readied. You look upset, amico mio, he chided. Truly, you must master these choleric humors. They may lead to a sickness. I gripped his cloak and pressed an arm to his throat. Pisanius has been elected to my seat, you fornicating liar, a gente nuova, without even a distinguished ancestry. Choking, he tried to push my hands away, but the strength of a scholar was unequal to that of one who daily carried stone. Stay, Montresor. You were ahead until the final ballot, and many compliments were voiced on the floor. Such exposure will not hurt when it comes time to award this year's business. But you promised me the election, and your breath stinks. Dear sir, the Doge himself could make no such guarantee. I lobbied, I cajoled, I leaned my thumb on the scales. He gazed heavenward. I swear by St. Mark you could have had no more earnest advocate. The competition was simply too stiff. However, another member is often absent, and some say he is a dotard. Where is my money? I will have it back since you were unsuccessful. Fortunato rolled his eyes and huffed. Am I dealing with a fool? You know where your gold went. Still, as I explained, the money is not wasted. Campaign again and start a step ahead. I allowed him to placate me with soft words and promises. As for your proposal that I stand again for the next vacant seat, perhaps committing a larger sum of money, I will have to take that under advisement. We parted still friends, or so I thought. Some weeks later, from a random remark repeated at earshot of an engineer at the arsenal, I learned my nomination to the council had in fact been blackballed. One member alone had crossed me off the list. No one could say, of course, who my enemy had been.
That was a great story. Everybody, you're listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So we have a few minutes left before the end of this first hour. So David, tell us about that when you were writing the story. You know, what was going through your mind as you were writing it?
Well, it was a combination of a visit to Venice that we made a couple of years ago, and I fell in love with that city. And I had always wanted to write the beginning of A Cask of Amontillado. As Lenore pointed out, it's a famous story because it has no beginning and no middle. It only has an end. Poe wrote this wonderful story that rivets us, but it's kind of missing something. So I always thought, gee, I would like to write the opening and the middle of A Cask of Amontillado. So I did.
That's good. I'd have to read them both back to back because I've never read that story of Poe. So.
Oh, this is the wonderful story where the friend tempts him away from the bazaar with the offering of tasting a pipe of Amontillado, and then leads him down into the catacombs, and then suddenly handcuffs him to the wall and begins to brick him up and leaves him there to die. So this is the beginning of that story. Why did he do that? Because Poe never addressed why that would be done and why this guy deserved such a fate. But I think you'll agree when you read the story, he did deserve it.
That's cool. All right. So this first hour we have been just pretty much doing readings. Lenore and David and Aphrodite. Really enjoyed this first hour doing all the readings and stuff. So in the second hour, Lenore, what I'd like to do is I'd like to, with this show we usually talk about like the nuts and bolts of the process and all that. So the second hour, I'd like to talk with you one-on-one about like the editing and all of that process. So I really appreciate Aphrodite and David and you being on the first hour here together with us. And I think it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, so you want to talk to me more about the nuts and bolts workman-like part of the writing stuff?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the process in the second hour. Yeah,
okay.
So yeah, it'll be pretty fun, and we'll talk about that. To wrap up this first hour, where can people check out the Night Bazaar and the Night Bazaar Venice?
Well, they're both, they should be readily available. I mean, we have our publishing website, Northampton House Press, has descriptions of the books and pictures of the covers, and conveniently has gathered all the sales links there. So if anyone wants to check out our website, it's www.northampton-house.com.
Okay.
They can just go there and choose their sales venue. But of course, anyone who wants to go to their favorite bookstore can certainly order it. Both are available easily. But people who want to shop online can find it at Amazon.com, and it's available in both ebook versions and trade paperback. So on Amazon, you can order the trade paperback, or they can get a Kindle version. If they go to BarnesandNoble.com, they can order a trade paperback, or they can get the version that would fit on their Nook reader. And I think and this is mostly Europe, although I think Walmart has purchased Kobo. So Kobo is an online, an ebook vendor also, which is available in Europe, but I think now maybe here too because it's been bought by Walmart. So there's Kobo, the ebook, and then Walmart is also carrying the book, I believe. And IndieBound, which is the independent bookseller site, also carries it.
So Northampton-Press is like the main website, though?
Yes, it's www.northampton, one word,
house.
Yes, hyphen.
Okay,
and
great.
then .com.
Okay, great. All right, so everybody stay tuned. We're going to come back at 4 o'clock with Lenore Hart, and we're going to be talking about editing and writing and that process. So thanks a lot. And you're listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul.
This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with Global Soul. This is Forget the Whale from the album What I Tell Myself EP.